200 fast attack boats do not sound like a navy capable of threatening the United States until they appear inside the Strait of Hormuz at the exact moment global shipping traffic compresses into one of the narrowest energy corridors on Earth. Then the math changes instantly, because the problem is not the size of the boats. The problem is distance, saturation, and timing. A single tanker burning in the strait can disrupt oil markets within hours. A disabled destroyer can redraw military posture across the Gulf. And a coordinated swarm moving at 40 knots through civilian traffic forces even advance warships into brutally compressed decision cycles. That is why a large-scale confrontation in Hormuz would never resemble a clean blue water naval battle between symmetrical fleets. It would look chaotic, close, fast, and terrifyingly dense. In this dramatized strategic reconstruction based on known regional doctrine, open-source naval tactics, and real-world operational realities, we explore a hypothetical escalation scenario in which U.S. warships and escort forces are forced to reopen the Hormuz Passage after mass harassment operations by Iranian patrol craft spiral into direct maritime conflict. To understand why such a confrontation matters, you have to understand what the strait actually is. Most people imagine a wide-open sea lane stretching comfortably between coastlines. It is not. At its narrowest point, the Strait of Hormuz is only about 21 miles across. But commercial shipping traffic is compressed into even tighter transit lanes, often just a few miles wide in each direction. Massive oil tankers, LNG carriers, container ships, naval escorts, surveillance aircraft, and patrol vessels all move through the same constrained geometry. There's almost no room for error. And Iran built its maritime doctrine around that reality decades ago. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy never intended to compete with American carrier groups in conventional fleet combat. Instead, it focused on asymmetry, swarm tactics, mines, shore-based missiles, drones, fast boats armed with rockets, machine guns, anti-ship missiles, or explosives. The objective is not necessarily to destroy an entire fleet. The objective is to overload reaction time, because even the most advanced warship in the world can only engage so many fast-moving contacts simultaneously before tactical space collapses. Now imagine that pressure multiplied across dozens of vessels, moving from multiple directions at once. That is the nightmare scenario naval planners train for. The first signs would probably not look like war. They would look like friction. Commercial captains reporting dangerous intercepts. Patrol boats cutting aggressively across shipping lanes. Drones appearing over tanker routes. Radar tracks forming unusual patterns near Iranian coastal waters. Escort commanders noticing increasing electronic interference across transit corridors. Then traffic begins slowing. And once traffic slows inside Hormuz, the strategic consequences start almost immediately. Oil markets react before missiles fly. Insurance firms recalculate exposure. Commercial shipping companies reroute cargo. Naval patrols intensify. Intelligence satellites retask overhead coverage. Everyone understands what comes next before it officially happens. In this scenario, the tipping point begins with a coordinated harassment operation against escorted tanker groups exiting the Gulf. Multiple fast attack boats emerge from concealed inlets and coastal positions simultaneously, forcing civilian traffic into evasive maneuvers, while drones provide overwatch from higher altitude. None of the individual boats are especially powerful. That is what makes the doctrine dangerous. Quantity becomes a weapon. A destroyer's radar can track hundreds of contacts, but identifying intent among civilian clutter is far harder than detecting movement. Fishing craft, commercial dhows, smugglers, patrol boats, and legitimate civilian traffic already crowd the region daily. Swarm tactics exploit that ambiguity. The escorts now face a brutal equation. Wait too long, and hostile boats close into missile or explosive range. React too early, and you risk firing into a confused maritime environment filled with civilian vessels and political consequences. This is where Hormuz differs from open ocean naval warfare. Everything happens close enough to matter immediately. American escort doctrine in the Gulf relies heavily on layered defense. Surveillance aircraft extend visibility beyond the horizon. Helicopters monitor small boat movement. Destroyers maintain missile defense coverage while electronic warfare teams search for targeting signals or coordinated communications. But saturation attacks are designed specifically to fracture layered systems. One wave distracts, another probes, a third attempts to penetrate. The escorts in this reconstruction begin noticing a dangerous pattern. The patrol boats are not approaching randomly. They are forming segmented clusters moving at different speeds and bearings. Some operate aggressively near civilian traffic. Others linger farther back, likely preserving missile range or acting as command relays. That indicates coordination, and coordinated movement changes the threat level immediately. Then another complication appears. Radar operators detect small surface anomalies drifting near a commercial transit lane behind the harassment group, possible mines. Now, the geometry becomes catastrophic. If mines are being deployed while swarm boats pressure escort formations, the mission is no longer simple convoy defense. It becomes maritime corridor survival, because mines do not just threaten ships physically. They threaten movement psychologically. A tanker captain who believes a route may be mined becomes cautious instantly. Commercial schedules collapse. Transit spacing widens. Insurance costs explode. Strategic pressure multiplies far beyond the actual number of explosives in the water. This is why naval mines remain among the cheapest and most effective maritime weapons ever created. You do not need hundreds. You only need uncertainty. The U.S. response in such a scenario would likely shift from passive escort posture into aggressive corridor control operations. Helicopters armed with precision weapons begin isolating fast-moving contacts outside civilian clusters. Destroyers reposition to create overlapping fields of fire, while surveillance aircraft attempt to map swarm patterns in real time. Then comes the moment every commander fears. One of the patrol boats accelerates directly toward a tanker group instead of maneuvering around it. Warnings are issued, ignored. The boat continues closing. At high speed, distance collapses frighteningly fast on water. A small craft moving 40 knots can cover engagement space in minutes. If commanders suspect explosive payloads or missile launch intent, hesitation becomes dangerous. The first engagement erupts almost instantly afterward. Tracer fire tears across the water. Rotary wing aircraft engage lead craft outside the tanker formation, while escort ships activate close-range defensive systems. Several attacking boats are destroyed quickly, but the problem is scale. The swarm keeps coming. This is where public imagination often misunderstands naval combat. People picture elegant missile duels between large warships far apart on open seas. Hormuz would not look elegant. It would look compressed and violent. Helicopters darting low over crowded waters. Small boats weaving between wakes. Radar operators struggling to classify dozens of contacts simultaneously. Civilian ships trapped inside maneuver corridors, while warships attempt to maintain firing discipline under saturation pressure. And behind everything, the constant fear that anti-ship missiles could emerge from the coastline itself. Iranian doctrine integrates coastal systems precisely for this reason. Fast boats alone are dangerous. Fast boats supported by shore-based missile batteries become exponentially more dangerous because they divide defensive attention. Every radar mission matters. Every electronic signal could indicate targeting preparation. The escort force now faces a second operational challenge beyond the swarm itself: missile threat timing. If coastal launch batteries coordinate with small boat pressure, defensive systems can become overloaded through sequencing rather than raw firepower. One layer forces ships to maneuver. Another forces radar prioritization. A third threatens from beyond visual range. This is modern asymmetric naval warfare, at its most dangerous, not because any individual weapon guarantees victory, but because overlapping systems compress decision-making faster than humans naturally process uncertainty. As the confrontation escalates in this reconstruction, additional U.S. assets begin converging toward the strait. More destroyers, carrier-based aircraft, maritime patrol platforms, allied escort vessels from regional partners already operating nearby. The mission changes from escorting traffic to restoring passage dominance. That distinction matters enormously. Escorting traffic accepts friction. Restoring passage dominance removes the threat environment itself, and removing it requires offensive pressure. Air assets begin targeting staging areas along coastal approaches identified through ISR feeds and electronic surveillance. Patrol craft concentrations near launch points are disrupted before they fully deploy. Drones orbit continuously over suspected mine deployment zones. The operational pace accelerates dramatically. Now the exchange math begins favoring the larger naval force. This is the uncomfortable truth about swarm doctrine against technologically advanced militaries. Swarms can create enormous tactical danger early in a confrontation, especially in constrained waters. But once surveillance integration, air superiority, and layered coordination stabilize, lightly armored fast boats become increasingly vulnerable. Speed stops compensating for exposure, especially in daylight. Attack helicopters armed with precision-guided rockets can dismantle small craft formations rapidly once identification becomes clear. Naval guns calibrated for close-range engagements become devastating against exposed boats. Armed drones eliminate hiding space across coastal approaches. And most critically, the escorts now understand the pattern. Pattern recognition changes combat. Early confusion favors a swarm. Stabilized tracking favors the fleet. The hypothetical figure of 200 destroyed patrol boats sounds enormous in headlines, but in operational terms, such numbers would likely represent cumulative attrition across multiple engagement zones over extended periods rather than a single cinematic clash. Some boats would be abandoned, others intercepted, some destroyed by air assets far from camera range. Many engagements would happen so quickly that only radar recordings and infrared footage would capture them properly. Meanwhile, the larger battle remains economic, because while naval crews fight for corridor control, global markets fight for stability. That is the real center of gravity in Hormuz. Roughly a fifth of the world's seaborne oil trade moves through the region. Even temporary disruption sends shockwaves outward through fuel pricing, manufacturing, insurance, and strategic reserves. Nations geographically distant from the Gulf still feel the pressure within days, which means a Hormuz confrontation is never regional for long. The deeper implication is even more serious. Modern naval power is no longer measured solely by fleet tonnage or missile count. It is measured by the ability to maintain uninterrupted systems under pressure. Trade systems, logistics systems, sensor systems, economic systems. Iranian asymmetric doctrine targets those systems indirectly. American naval doctrine attempts to preserve them directly. That is the real strategic collision underneath the explosions. By the midpoint of this reconstruction, the Hormuz Passage begins reopening under heavily armed escort conditions. Mine countermeasure teams sweep transit corridors continuously. Surveillance aircraft monitor coastal movement around the clock. Civilian shipping resumes cautiously under military overwatch. But the operational environment is permanently altered because now every captain in the region knows how close the corridor came to shut down. And every military planner now possesses new data. That may be the most important consequence of all. Modern conflicts are laboratories of adaptation. Every radar lock, every drone feed, every missile intercept, every failed maneuver becomes material for the next confrontation. The side that learns faster gains long-term advantage even during tactical setbacks, which means both sides would emerge from such an encounter changed. American forces would likely refine anti-swarm doctrine even further, integrating AI-assisted tracking, expanded drone coordination, and distributed close-range engagement systems designed specifically for dense maritime environments. Iran, meanwhile, would study timing failures, exposure patterns, and response thresholds while searching for cheaper, faster, and harder-to-detect methods of creating strategic disruption. Because the objective was never necessarily total naval victory. The objective was leverage, and leverage survives even failed operations if uncertainty remains. That is why Hormuz remains one of the most dangerous waterways on Earth despite decades without full-scale naval war. Everyone operating there understands the stakes too clearly. A missile launched accidentally, a patrol boat misidentified, a mine drifting into civilian traffic, a radar signal interpreted the wrong way. Any one of those moments can begin a chain reaction larger than the vessels involved. The escorts in this scenario eventually succeed in restoring controlled passage through the strait. Tankers resume movement. International naval patrols expand. Public statements emphasize stability and freedom of navigation. On the surface, order returns. But beneath that order sits a harder reality. The confrontation proved that global commerce now moves through maritime choke points permanently shadowed by low-cost asymmetric threats. It proved that billion-dollar warships can still be pressured by small, fast craft operating inside compressed geography. And it proved that future naval warfare may depend less on decisive fleet battles and more on continuous corridor control against distributed, ambiguous, and highly adaptive threats. That changes doctrine everywhere, not just in the Gulf. From the South China Sea to the Red Sea, navies around the world are watching the same lessons emerge repeatedly. Cheap drones threaten expensive platforms. Small units create strategic disruption. Information spreads faster than missiles. Civilian infrastructure becomes part of the battle space. The age of uncontested maritime dominance is fading into something far more unstable. And perhaps the most dangerous part of all is this. The next Hormuz crisis may not begin with missiles. It may begin with a radar return nobody fully understands. A drifting object near a tanker lane. A drone appearing briefly over dark water. A cluster of small boats moving slightly too fast toward a shipping corridor at dawn. Because in modern naval conflict, the line between pressure and war is no longer marked clearly. It moves with the tide.